The morning of September 11th, 2001, began like so many others in the city that never slept. The sun rose gently over Manhattan, washing the skyline in golden light. The streets were already alive with taxis honking, commuters hurrying, and coffee carts serving their usual customers. To most, it was just another Tuesday, a day of routines, meetings, and plans waiting to unfold. For the Morales family, who lived in Queens and worked in different parts of the city, it was supposed to be an ordinary morning, filled with the rhythm of their familiar life. David Morales, the father, kissed his wife Elena on the cheek before rushing out the door. He was an accountant with an office in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. He often left early before the children were fully awake, but that morning he lingered for a few extra minutes at the breakfast table. He listened as his daughter, Sophia, an energetic 11-year-old, described a new story she was writing for school. His son, Matthew, only 8, was still groggy, eating his cereal with sleepy eyes. Elena laughed at her husband's attempt to juggle 2 conversations at once, knowing he would soon be late for the subway. David finally stood, gathered his things, and gave each of them a hug. His words were simple but heartfelt. "I'll see you tonight. Don't forget I love you." No one knew those words would be his last goodbye. Elena's morning was filled with its own rituals. She worked part-time at a bookstore in Lower Manhattan, just a short walk from the towers. Her shift didn't begin until mid-morning, so she walked the children to school first. She loved those quiet moments, holding their hands as they crossed the busy streets, listening to Sophia chatter about her story and Matthew's complaints about math homework. Elena had a way of making the ordinary feel special, of turning even the walk to school into a little adventure. She promised the children they would stop for ice cream after school if the weather stayed warm. By the time she kissed them goodbye at the school gates, the morning seemed set, predictable, safe. She turned toward the subway, thinking about the new book delivery waiting at the store and which titles might catch the interest of her regular customers. She thought about dinner that evening, maybe chicken and rice, David's favorite. For Elena, the days stretched ahead like countless others before it. Manageable, ordinary, peaceful. Inside the towers, David arrived at his office on the 98th floor. He had a meeting scheduled for later in the morning, but he enjoyed the quiet before the rush. He stood by the window for a moment, gazing at the panoramic view of the city he loved. New York always inspired him, even after years of living there. He thought about the mortgage they had almost finished paying, the possibility of taking the children to Disney World next summer, and the way Elena's eyes had sparkled that morning when she laughed. Life felt full, imperfect at times, but good. He sat down at his desk, poured himself a cup of coffee, and started going through the numbers on his screen. Elsewhere, in the crowded streets, the world moved on, unaware of what was coming. People hailed taxis, sipped lattes, and checked their watches. The Morales children sat in their classrooms, Sophia doodling in her notebook, Matthew staring out the window, eager for recess. Elena stepped out of the subway, her scarf fluttering in the breeze as she walked toward the bookstore. There was nothing unusual in the air, no sign that the world was about to fracture in ways none of them could imagine. That morning carried a sense of calm that made what followed all the more unbearable. The Morales family lived that first part of the day, as they had so many others, guided by routines and simple joys. They were just like thousands of other families across the city, parents working, children at school, dreams quietly building in the background. No one could have known that their story, so full of ordinary beauty, was about to be interrupted by tragedy on a scale so vast it would echo across the entire globe. The perfection of that morning lay not in extraordinary events, but in the small, unnoticed moments. A shared breakfast, a child's story, a kiss at the door, a promise of ice cream. They were moments that might have been forgotten if not for what came after. But because of what was about to unfold, those fleeting details became eternal, carved into memory as the last pure expressions of a family's love before the world shifted forever. For the Morales family, September 11th began as a perfect morning in New York, just another day. Yet in hindsight, that morning stands as a fragile, glowing reminder of everything they were together, of the laughter, the hopes, and the love that bound them. And though the day would soon descend into chaos and devastation, that perfect beginning endures, a final portrait of their life before the sky itself seemed to fall. At 8:46 a.m., the pulse of New York City faltered. The Morales family's ordinary morning, like so many others, was shattered in an instant when American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center, the very building where David Morales sat at his desk. The impact shook the skyscraper violently, a thunderous explosion reverberating across the city. Papers, glass, and fire burst outward into the clear blue sky. For those inside the tower, confusion overtook routine in a heartbeat. Lights flickered, alarms screamed, and then came the smell of burning jet fuel, a sharp, suffocating odor that clung to everything. David, along with his co-workers, scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. Some thought it was an earthquake, others a bomb. But as smoke began filling the hallways, the grim reality set in. Something catastrophic had just occurred. On the streets below, chaos erupted. Crowds looked upward in horror, watching black smoke pour from the gaping wound in the tower. Sirens wailed as firefighters and police officers raced toward the scene, unaware they were walking into one of the most dangerous missions of their lives. Cell phones came alive, thousands of people calling loved ones, desperate to connect. Elena, who had just arrived at the bookstore a few blocks away, felt her phone vibrate in her bag. A co-worker pointed toward the skyline, her face pale. Elena stepped outside, craning her neck, and saw the smoke billowing from the very building where her husband worked. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried calling David, but the lines were jammed. Again and again, she pressed redial, praying for his voice. She told herself he would already be evacuating, that he would be safe, that he was on his way out. Still, an invisible weight pressed down on her chest. She wanted to run to the towers, to find him, but police were already blocking the streets, forcing crowds back. All she could do was stand there, staring at the burning tower, and whisper his name like a prayer. Inside the North Tower, the situation grew desperate. David's office was far above the impact zone, and escape routes were cut off by fire and debris. He and dozens of others huddled together, searching for options. Some dialed 911, their voices trembling as they pleaded for help. Others reached for their phones, trying to call home. David managed to leave a short voicemail for Eleanor, his voice calm, but heavy with unspoken fear. "It's me. Something's happened at the office. I'm okay right now. Tell the kids I love them. I'll try to get out." It was the last time she would ever hear his voice. At 9:03 a.m., just 17 minutes after the first impact, a second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, sliced into the South Tower. The explosion thundered through Lower Manhattan, a sound that made the ground tremble. The second strike erased any doubt. This was no accident. The city and the world now knew they were under attack. Panic spread like wildfire. Elena felt her knees weaken as she clutched her phone, tears streaming down her face. Around her, strangers gasped, some screaming, some falling into stunned silence. For a moment, time seemed to stop, as if the entire city held its breath. The unthinkable had become reality. The skyline, once a symbol of power and resilience, was now engulfed in smoke and fire. In classrooms across Queens, teachers rushed to shield children from the news, but whispers spread quickly. Sophia, ever perceptive, noticed her teacher's pale face and the way she kept glancing at the clock. Matthew, restless, felt a knot in his stomach without knowing why. Parents began arriving at schools in droves, desperate to take their children home, desperate to feel their arms around them. But Elena could not leave her post. She couldn't bear to leave the streets near the towers, as though standing there might somehow bring David back to her. By 9:30 a.m., the city was drowning in sirens. Firefighters, many of them off duty, poured into lower Manhattan, charging up the stairwells of the burning towers. Police officers directed the terrified crowds, guiding thousands towards safety. Amid the terror, there were moments of extraordinary bravery. Strangers held each other's hands. People carried the injured down endless flights of stairs. And through it all, the Morales family's story was one among thousands. One family caught in the maelstrom of history, their fate tied to the steel and glass of the North Tower. At 9:59 a.m., as Elena stood frozen in the crowd, the unthinkable happened. The South Tower began to collapse. The once mighty structure crumbled in seconds, a roar of steel and dust engulfing the streets. People screamed and ran as a monstrous cloud of ash swept over them. Elena stumbled, choking, her world swallowed in grey. She thought of David, of Sophia and Matthew, of the promise of ice cream after school. She thought of the life they had built together, and the possibility that in a single morning it was slipping away. The city had fallen silent, not in peace, but in shock. A silence so profound it was louder than the chaos. A silence that carried the weight of grief not yet spoken. The Morales family, like thousands of others, was caught in that silence. A silence filled with unanswered calls, broken promises, and love stretching desperately across an unbridgeable distance. That morning, New York was transformed forever. And for Elena, as the dust settled around her, the only sound that remained was the echo of David's last words, replaying in her mind. "Tell the kids I love them." In the chaos of the North Tower, time was no longer measured by minutes, but by breaths, by heartbeats, by the frantic urgency of voices on phones. David Morales stood in a corner of his office, the room thick with smoke creeping under the door, clutching his cell phone as though it were a lifeline. He had tried again and again to reach Elena, but the lines were overloaded. Each failed connection felt like another door slamming shut. Around him, colleagues were doing the same, dialing, redialing, some breaking down in tears, others whispering final goodbyes to answering machines. The air was heavy with despair, but also with something fierce, the human will to connect even at the very end. At 10:02 a.m., after countless failed attempts, David's phone finally connected. On the other end, Eleanor's voice trembled, almost unrecognizable, raw with fear and relief. "David, is it you?" Her words were rushed, desperate. She had been waiting, praying for this moment. "It's me," he said softly, though his voice was hoarse from the smoke. "I'm here." Oot! The noise of sirens and shouting filtered faintly through her end of the call. But for David, everything else disappeared. In that moment, the world shrank to the fragile thread of his wife's voice. Eleanor clutched the phone with both hands as though holding him through it. She pressed it so hard against her ear, it hurt, but she didn't care. For a few stolen minutes, they were together again. "What's happening? Where are you?" she asked, tears blurring her vision. "I'm still in the office," he replied. "We can't get down, the stairs are gone. But I'm okay, I'm not hurt." He lied, because already his lungs burned from the smoke, and the heat was unbearable. But he knew the truth would only destroy her faster. Elena tried to be strong, but her voice cracked. "The kids, they're safe at school. I'll go get them soon. They don't know yet. I don't know what to tell them. Tell them I love them," he whispered. "Tell Sophia I can't wait to read her story. Tell Matthew he's braver than he thinks." He closed his eyes, picturing their faces, memorizing them as though the memory could carry him past the flames. On the street below, Elena clung to the phone, her body trembling as the weight of his words pressed down on her. Around her, the city was in chaos, but all she could hear was his voice, the man she had built her life with, the father of her children, speaking to her from a place she could not reach. "David, you're going to get out," she insisted, her tone fierce now, almost commanding. "The firefighters are coming. They'll find you. Just hold on. Promise me you'll hold on." He wanted to promise, wanted to tell her he would walk back through their door that evening as always. But promises had to be true, and he could not bring himself to lie so completely. Instead, he said, "I'll try. For you, I'll try. There was a pause then, a silence filled only by static, but in that silence they heard each other breathing. It was as if the very sound of life, of existence, was the most precious gift they had left. "I need you to listen to me," David said finally. His voice was steadier than she expected, and it terrified her. "Whatever happens, I want you to know. You were my life, you and the kids. Everything I did, everything I dreamed was for you. Don't let this day take that away from you. Live, Elena, live for all of us." Her tears fell freely now, her shoulders shaking. "Don't talk like that, please, don't." "I have to," he said gently, "because I don't know how much time I have." And then, through the line, there was a muffled sound, like a low rumble. Elena froze, her heart hammering, terrified the building was shifting. "David," she whispered. "I'm still here," he answered quickly, trying to calm her. "I'm not going anywhere until I have to." For a few more minutes they exchanged fragments of memories, clinging to words like lifelines. They talked about the first time they met, about Sophia's laughter, about how Matthew always insisted on sleeping with the light on. Each memory was a piece of their life together, fragile yet indestructible, carried on the trembling wire of a phone call. Then at 10:28 a.m., as they spoke, a deafening roar overtook the line. The North Tower began to collapse, steel groaning, glass shattering, floors pancaking one upon another. Elena heard the sound before she understood it, the kind of sound that cuts into the soul. "David!" she screamed into the phone. "David, are you there? Please!" But the line had gone silent. The world around her blurred as the tower disappeared in a cloud of ash and fire. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the pavement, yet she could still hear his last words echoing in her mind. "Live for all of us." That final call was both a farewell and a blessing, a testament to love's ability to reach across even the most impossible distances. Though the line went dead, the connection remained, imprinted forever on her heart. For Eleanor, those words became her compass, guiding her through the grief that would follow. And though she could never hold him again, in that last conversation, David gave her the strength to carry on, not just for herself, but for the family they had built together. When tragedy strikes, it often reveals truths about people that remain hidden in ordinary life. On September 11th, amid the flames, smoke, and chaos, the streets of New York became a stage for countless acts of bravery, many of them unseen, unrecorded, carried out by ordinary people who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances. For the Morales family's story, these unseen heroes became intertwined with their fate, shaping the final hours of David's life and the long years of survival that followed for Elena, Sophia, and Matthew. Inside the North Tower, the situation had grown dire. Fire raged in the upper floors, trapping hundreds of workers. Yet amidst the terror, strangers became allies. David, unable to find a clear path to the stairwells, encountered a group of colleagues gathered in the smoke-filled corridor. Some were injured, one man with a badly burned arm, another woman coughing so hard she could barely stand. David, who had always been quiet and reserved at home, discovered a strength he didn't know he had. He pulled off his jacket, wrapped it around the injured arm, and helped the man stay upright. "We're going to try together," he told them, his voice steady, though his own fear gnawed at him. In another part of the tower, firefighters climbed relentlessly upward, carrying hoses and gear that weighed more than most people could lift. They passed by streams of evacuees heading down, urging them forward with calm voices. "Keep moving, you're doing great, almost there." For many, those reassurances became lifelines. Some survivors later said it was the sight of firefighters climbing into the smoke, going against the flow, that gave them the courage to keep descending. Those men were heroes, though most would never make it out alive. Elena, stranded in the streets below, witnessed her own moments of heroism. When the South Tower collapsed, the air filled with choking dust and panic. People stumbled blindly, unable to breathe. Elena, despite her own terror, grabbed the arm of an elderly woman who had fallen, pulling her into the corner of a deli where a group of strangers huddled together. They shared water, tore shirts into makeshift masks, and tried to steady each other. None of them knew one another's names, but in that moment, they became a kind of family. Elena remembered clutching the old woman's hand, repeating, "We'll be okay, we'll be okay," even though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Back inside the tower, as the minutes bled away, David's group tried to find a way down, only to be turned back by impassable flames. That was when another kind of hero appeared. Not a firefighter, but a janitor named Miguel. He had worked in the building for over 20 years and knew the hidden back corridors and service passages. With smoke filling his lungs, he led a small group, including David, through maintenance stairwells that weren't on the official evacuation maps. "Stay low, follow me," he barked, his voice hoarse but commanding. For a few precious minutes, hope flickered again, yet fate was merciless. By the time they reached the lower levels, the collapse of the South Tower had damaged exits and blocked pathways. Miguel refused to give up. He pushed debris aside, tried to clear a way forward, and urged others to keep moving. In the end, most of those who followed him did not survive. But in his determination, in his refusal to abandon strangers, Miguel embodied the essence of what it meant to be a hero in the shadows. A man whose courage would never make headlines, but whose actions defined humanity at its best in the face of its worst. For Elena, the true scope of these hidden acts of bravery only became clear later in the stories that trickled out from survivors. She heard accounts of strangers carrying one another down dozens of flights of stairs, of office workers who refused to leave until they found their colleagues, of firefighters who kept climbing even when they knew they wouldn't return. She clung to these stories because they offered a measure of peace. If David's final moments were lived among such people, then he was not alone. In the weeks and months after the towers fell, the city itself became a portrait of these heroes. Volunteers flooded into Manhattan to bring food, water, and blankets. Blood donation centers overflowed with people wanting to help. Even in grief, the spirit of New York, the resilience, the solidarity, shone through. Elena often thought about the nameless man who had handed her a bottle of water when she couldn't stop coughing, or the young woman who wrapped her arm around her shoulders and guided her through the smoke until she could breathe again. These people had entered her life for only a moment, but their kindness had left an imprint that time could not erase. For Sophia and Matthew, still children, the idea of heroes became something they would wrestle with for years. At first, they thought of heroes as comic book figures, Superman, Batman, men who always came back home. But as they grew, they came to understand that heroes were often ordinary people who made impossible choices in impossible moments. Heroes were the firefighters who went up when everyone else came down. Heroes were the strangers who gave comfort in the streets. Heroes were people like their father who had tried to help others even as his own chances dwindled. The Morales family's story was not one of survival in the physical sense, but it was deeply bound to the survival of humanity's better nature. In the shadows of that day, where despair should have been absolute, light kept breaking through in the form of kindness, bravery, and sacrifice. These were the quiet moments of greatness that would never be captured fully on film or in headlines, but they lived on in the memories of those who bore witness. For Elena, when grief threatened to drown her in the years that followed, she returned again and again to those memories of strangers' hands reaching out, of voices offering hope, of courage blooming where no one expected it. Those heroes in the shadows did not erase her loss, but they reminded her that even in a world shattered by hatred, love and bravery were stronger. And perhaps in some way they carried David's spirit forward. Not as a victim, but as one among many who stood in the fire and chose to be more than afraid. In the days after the towers fell, New York was unrecognizable. The skyline, once proud and unshakable, had a wound carved into it, a gaping emptiness where steel and glass had stood. The air was thick with dust, a grey haze that clung to clothes, skin, and lungs. For weeks, the smell of smoke and scorched metal lingered, a constant reminder of all that had been lost. And among the ash that blanketed the streets lay fragments of lives once whole, shreds of paper, office memos fluttering like snow, a child's photograph, a broken watch frozen at the moment the world stopped. For Elena Morales, the days that followed blurred into one long night of waiting. She searched tirelessly, clinging to the hope that maybe David had found a way out, that maybe he was lying in a hospital bed somewhere, unable to call but still alive. She walked from shelter to shelter, pinned missing posters on walls already crowded with faces, and showed his photo to strangers who shook their heads with pity. Everywhere she turned, she found the same hollow look in the eyes of other wives, husbands, parents, each of them waiting, refusing to let go. At night, when the city fell into uneasy silence, Elena sat at the edge of her bed with the children curled beside her, their faces streaked with tears. Sophia asked when her father was coming home. Matthew begged to know why the bad men had taken the airplanes. Elena held them tightly, her own grief locked deep inside, and whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "We'll be okay. We'll always remember him. He'll never leave us." The words were all she had to give them. The apartment itself became a museum of absence. David's shoes by the door, the book he had left half read on the nightstand, the smell of his cologne lingering faintly on his jacket. Every object became sacred, heavy with meaning. Elena couldn't bring herself to move anything. Even the empty coffee mug he had used that morning sat untouched on the counter, as if waiting for him to return and finish it. Weeks later, when the official lists confirmed his name among the dead, Elena felt as though the air had been knocked out of her. There was no body to bury, no grave to visit. For so many families, closure was denied. The towers had turned lives into dust. What remained were memories, intangible yet unbearably heavy. The city tried to grieve together. Makeshift memorials appeared on street corners, candles flickering in the night, flowers piled high, handwritten notes tucked between them. Photos of the missing covered the walls near Ground Zero, turning the city into a gallery of faces. Elena visited daily, tracing David's photo with her fingers as though the image itself could bridge the chasm between life and death. For the children, memory became both a comfort and a burden. Sophia clung to the last morning she had with her father, the way he had listened to her story so intently, as if her words were the most important in the world. Matthew replayed the sound of David's laughter in his head, afraid that one day he would forget it. They drew pictures of their father at school, some of him flying in the clouds, others of him standing strong like a superhero. Their teachers tried gently to help, but grief is not something that can be taught away. It had settled into the fabric of their lives. Eleanor herself became haunted by the last phone call. She replayed it endlessly in her mind. The calmness in David's voice, the love in his words, the silence at the end when the line went dead. That memory was both her torment and her anchor. It hurt more than anything she had ever known, but it also reminded her of the love that had defined their life together. In time, she realized it was love, not loss, that she had to hold on to. But ashes remained, not only in the streets of Manhattan, but in her heart. Every milestone became a reminder of absence. Sophia's 12th birthday came, and David wasn't there to blow out the candles. Matthew's first soccer game passed without his father cheering from the sidelines. At school plays, graduations, holidays, there was always an empty chair, a silence where laughter should have been. The family learned to live with that silence, though it never grew easier. Elena often walked to the site where the towers had stood. The rubble was eventually cleared, but the emptiness remained, vast and echoing. She would stand at the fences with other families, sometimes exchanging stories, sometimes just crying together. Grief, she learned, was less suffocating when shared. These strangers, bound by the same loss, became her community. They understood what outsiders could not. the strange mixture of pride and sorrow in remembering the ones who were gone. Out of the ashes, memories became sacred rituals. On the anniversary each year, Elena and the children lit candles in the window. They told stories about David, not just about the day he died, but about the life he had lived. They laughed about his terrible dance moves, his endless patience helping Matthew with math homework, the way he called Sophia "my little storyteller." In remembering him, they kept him alive. And yet, beneath every smile lay the ache of longing. Memories were precious, but they were not touch, not breath, not presence. They were shadows of a life that had once been whole. Elena knew she would carry that duality forever, the blessing of memory and the curse of absence. Still, as years passed, the ashes began to transform. They no longer symbolized only destruction, but resilience. The Morales family had been torn apart, yet in Sophia and Matthew, David lived on. In their laughter, in their stubbornness, in their dreams, traces of him echoed. Elena realized that while the towers had fallen, love had not. Love, even in ashes, endures. Long after the smoke cleared from the skyline of New York, long after the last fragments of steel were pulled from the rubble, their story continued to live, etched not just in history, but in the hearts of those who loved them. The tragedy of September 11th did not only take lives, it left a silence, a haunting echo that never truly faded. And in that silence, the memory of one family, ordinary in their routines, but extraordinary in their love, continued to speak. The neighbors remembered them not for how they died, but for how they lived. Sarah's laugh that carried across the hallway, Michael's easy smile as he walked the children to school, Emily's curious questions about the world, and Daniel's boundless energy that seemed impossible to contain. They were not statistics in a historical tragedy, they were flesh and blood. A family whose presence turned an apartment into a home, whose love made the mundane luminous. The final call, preserved like a fragile relic of their last moments, was replayed not in sound, but in memory. I love you. Tell the kids I love them too. Whatever happens, we'll be together. Those words became the cornerstone of remembrance, the sentence engraved into the hearts of those left behind. It was not simply a farewell, it was a declaration of their truth, that even in death, they would remain bound together. In the months that followed, vigils were held, candles burned into the night, and photographs of the family were pinned to walls of remembrance. Each picture was more than an image. It was a story, a vacation at the beach, smiles pressed against golden sunsets, a birthday party with a homemade cake and icing smeared across small fingers, an ordinary Tuesday morning breakfast, cereal bowls scattered across the kitchen table. Every picture whispered the same message. They had lived, they had loved, and their love still mattered. The tragedy of 9/11 shattered countless lives, but it also revealed something unexpected: resilience. Strangers who had never met Sarah or Michael found themselves touched by their story. They wrote letters, sent flowers, offered prayers. Some said they were reminded to cherish their own families more deeply, to hold their children tighter, to never let a goodbye go unsaid. Their loss became a quiet lesson to the world, that love, even when interrupted by violence, endures. Years later, at the memorial pools where the names of the victims are engraved in bronze, visitors often stop at their family's name. Some trace the letters with their fingers, pausing as if to acknowledge not only who was lost, but the life that once burned so brightly. On anniversaries, relatives return to lay roses, their petals soft against the cold metal. Sometimes children who never met them come too, listening as stories are passed down, making sure that their memory is not confined to history books, but carried forward into the future. What makes their story remarkable is not the scale of their tragedy, but the intimacy of their love. They were together in life, at the breakfast table, in family outings, in bedtime stories, and they were together in death, caught in the same cruel moment of history. And yet, what remains is not despair. What remains is the knowledge that they faced the unimaginable bound by the very force that defined them, love. As years turn into decades, the world changes. New towers rise on the horizon, children grow, generations shift, but some things remain untouched by time. The sound of Sarah's laugh still echoes in the minds of her friends. The warmth of Michael's voice still lingers in the hearts of his parents. The promise spoken in that final call continues to reverberate. Whatever happens, we'll be together. And so, their story is not just a tragedy. It is a love story. It is the reminder that no matter how violently the world may break, there are bonds that cannot be severed. Together until the end was not merely their fate, it was their truth. In the face of fire, steel, and ash, they remained unshakably united. And in memory, they always will. For those who walk past their names at the memorial, for those who light candles in their honor, for those who whisper a prayer when September 11th returns each year, their story continues to matter. They are not just a chapter in history. They are a testament to what endures when everything else is taken away. Love, family, togetherness, forever. If this story moved you, take a moment to honor the lives lost on September 11th and support the families forever changed by that day. Share this video to keep their memory alive and let the world remember that every name had a story, a life full of love and dreams. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that celebrates courage, resilience, and the human spirit. Comment below to share your thoughts, your memories, or simply to send strength to those still carrying the weight of that tragedy. Together we can make sure the voices of those taken too soon are never forgotten, and their stories continue to inspire generations. Every like, every share, and every word of support keeps their legacy alive. Stand with us, and stand with every family who faced the unimaginable on that fateful day.